I'm thinking I need some kind of intro, something or other, audio cue or something like that, so that way I'm not just saying, and we're live, or something stupid like that. Because, I mean, looking at what other people are doing right now, I mean, Crowder's got his strange animal intro, and a couple other live streams have something similar. Uh-oh, did it? Did my video just freeze? Is that... Yep. What's going on there? Alright, there it goes. So, I don't know why my stream sort of froze there. Let's see if that fixed it. Wait for it to catch up, I guess, for the stream. But, yeah, we are live, so welcome. I know the video's probably frozen at the moment, but welcome to HUMANe Mind Live, episode 120. Tara King, the Joe Erotic story. Stumbled over my words there, but... Alright, so we're going to be talking about a very short episode. I don't have much prepared for this week. Not a whole lot going on outside of Corona nonsense, and I've been recovering from something over the weekend. I don't know if it was something I ate bad or if I had a small case of the flu, but not a fun weekend for me.
I think you got the CV.
You got the what?
CV? The coronavirus?
Oh, nah. Because coronavirus isn't related to the, stomach issues. It's all upper respiratory stuff, but...
I don't know.
Yeah.
There's other reports of like people getting spots on their feet and whatnot. I don't know.
What?
And apparently there was the story of a Chinese doctor who turned black. Recovering from... There was two doctors.
The COVID turned them black.
Just their faces.
Okay. I don't know how that would work. I mean, it doesn't impact more than just the lungs, but that's primarily what it impacts is your upper respiratory. But usually, if you have symptoms of throwing up or diarrhea, that's not COVID related. So stomach issues, not so much reported back to COVID. Although if you do end up dying from something like that, they would mark it down as COVID. All right, so yeah, everything else is all lockdown related and quarantine, and Trump wants to cut people open and shine lights on their insides, and told people to drink and inject bleach drink bleach and inject Lysol into their veins or something stupid. But I mean, everybody's been talking about that and how it's absolute nonsense.
Well, it's not how they would even interpret that. They just had what was he, the head science director or something for DHS, talking about all that right before he got up, and so he's just like, he's going to ask some questions people might be asking. Can you take what you just said and use that as possible research for trying to cure this inside, not just outside?
Yeah,
It's basically summed it up, but at no point was he advising people to inject bleach or drink bleach.
Well, the other thing is he's saying you guys are testing stuff like this, right? And all the doctors nodded and were like, or said something in agreement, and he's like, yeah, that's stuff they're looking into. That's not stuff that you need to try at home. At no point does he say, oh, do this at home.
Well, he even said, I'm not a professional. He said that. It's just media being stupid.
Yeah. Yeah, media being stupid. Well, there's other things with the whole lockdown and things going overboard as far as what local police are doing and what mayors and governors are doing. Like Whitmore or whatever, something, Whitmore. Some people are saying Witless or half Whitmore or something like that. But banning planting seeds, buying seeds. In some places, I think New Jersey, the governor threatened that if a religious institution, if they gather their people into, in order to observe, like a church service or religious observation or something like that, they could shut down that church. I was like,
That's
that
not constitutional at all.
no, no, and
That's totally
that
violent.
was when he was asked that question. I was like, well, how can you circumvent the Constitution like that? He's like, oh, that's above my pay grade. I'm like, no, that's exactly your pay grade. You're you're the governor.
You're the governor. You run that state. You're in charge of that.
Yeah, you are responsible to adhere to the Constitution. That's like, I could understand if you were a mayor or a sheriff or something, say, oh, that's above my pay grade, sort of thing, because you're getting orders from the governor or from a senator or from somebody higher up in the political tier. But if you're the governor, you're in charge of that state. This is not.
He's also the one making up those regulations.
Yeah,
That's not federal. That's coming from his own head.
Yeah, he's the one making that rule. So, and that rule is in direct violation of the Constitution of the U.S. Yeah, it's so hopefully.
I don't know what's happening. It seems it's not just a lockdown, but it's kind of a scary thing to where you can see oppressive police forces not using their brain and not doing what they're supposed to as their job.
Oh yeah. So
Instead, they're acting more like, oh well, I'm just following orders. You know, the whole Nazi excuse.
Yeah, I'm just following orders. But the
Sorry
strange thing is,
dead people, but I was just following orders.
The people making up the orders are acting like they're just following orders, which is stupid. Like Whitmer and the New Jersey guy, and there's a bunch of other cases of this. I think it was also New Jersey, or it might have been like the mayor. It might have been. I know it was De Blasio, the mayor of New York, asked for people to narc on their people who aren't observing social distancing, and instead they got flooded with a bunch of dick pics.
Oh yeah, I heard about that. Start a narc hotline.
Yeah. Like, oh, if you see somebody not observing social distancing, call them in. Well, here's the so there's the people responded appropriately, like, yeah, just screw off. This is not, we're not doing this. But in other places, people are reporting, like when there was they went to the beach and all that sort of, so certain beaches opened up in like Jacksonville, Florida, and people were reporting, oh, those guys aren't practicing social distancing. And I'm like, they're talking about people that arrived in the same car together and went to the beach together, and like, oh, they're not staying 6 feet apart. It's like,
well, there was another video of an elderly couple in their 90s.
Yeah,
and they brought like beach chairs, and a horseback cop said you can't use those chairs. You have to sit on the ground because it looks like it's permanent. I think he just made that up. I don't understand what that even means. It's a beach chair.
Yeah, so there's two things that are being overlooked by these simpletons. First thing is, if people live together or sleep in the same bed or live in the same house or drove in the same car, they don't need to social distance from each other when they're out in public. Social distancing, which actually, the social distancing, I don't know why that took off. That's the incorrect. It should be physical distancing, as we can still communicate with each other online and other stuff like that, but... And even when you're 6 feet apart, you can still talk to each other and all that sort of stuff. It should be physically distancing from people you don't interact with on a regular basis. Like strangers, people you don't see every day because you don't know what they've been up to or if they encountered COVID. You don't physically distance from people you live with or people you carpooled to the beach with. Or in some cases where it was a couple kissing in public, and cops came and like, oh, you can't do that here. You're not practicing physical distancing. They're like, it's a husband and wife, and they're kissing in public. They would do that at home. They probably do a lot more than just kissing at home.
And if one's sick, I don't think the other cares about getting themselves sick. That's the way couples are.
Yeah.
You don't separate yourselves and you quarantine the inside of your house. What is that?
Yeah, they're not getting people other than themselves sick. That's the physical distancing. That's what it's supposed to do. And I mean, if you look at the actual statistics and all this physical distancing, all this quarantine nonsense, did absolutely nothing. Places that didn't do this, they're seeing similar results, similar rates.
Because I think over half the population probably already got it at some point.
Yeah.
And so distancing doesn't do anything because you already had it.
So places like Sweden and a couple other places where they didn't do they still gave the guidelines of, hey, if you're a at-risk individual, stay in the home, don't go out. But they didn't make a mandatory lockdown. They didn't shut down their businesses. They didn't shut down schools or anything like that. And while people were criticizing them, and they did see a rise in cases and in deaths, it was at the same ratio you would expect. And now their economy is going to continue, and their society is going to continue. But either they've established a herd immunity, because right now their cases are going down. So it was like they were talking about that the whole graph where we're expecting to see this huge spike up and this huge spike down. Well, that's what Sweden did. They're like, hey, we're gonna have a couple of weeks where there's a spike up and then a spike down, and then we can manage it. Everywhere else, they decided to flatten the curve and put on all these restrictions. So they saw this increase, and it didn't go up as high, but now it's gonna last much longer. And I'm like, you still get the same amount either way, and the whole reason they wanted to flatten that curve was to avoid overwhelming our medical facilities, and that never happened either. A lot of our medical facilities, especially like the cruise line, the USS Mercy that they established in New York to act as an additional hospital, they were seeing a capacity of like 10%, and so then they sent it home.
Yeah,
because they're like, yeah, we don't even have full capacity at our current places. We're only using 10% of this. There's no reason to have it.
Well, part of the initial medical rush was nobody knew what COVID was, and so there wasn't people necessarily dying from it, but getting the flu or getting sick symptoms and worrying about it and rushing to hospitals, hoping for something. Yeah. So during the initial talks of quarantine, hospitals were getting overwhelmed, but it wasn't all just from patients that needed ventilators and on the verge of death. It was just people not having enough information and saying, am I sick? Could I die? I need to go to the hospital.
Yeah. And we saw this pretty prevalent amongst celebrities, where they would go and get tested, and they're like, oh, I don't have symptoms, or oh, I'm not too bad. And it's like, then why did you go and get tested? All these people coming out saying, oh, I've got corona, and you're like, why? Why did you... You aren't somebody who's in critical condition, or somebody's like, oh, it's getting worse and worse, I need to go to the hospital. No, you went to the hospital because you knew this thing was out there. If you hadn't heard of corona, and if there hadn't been all this hysteria, you'd been like, oh, it's just a regular cold, gonna go about my day.
Yep.
Alright. So, yeah, not to spend too much more time on that, but because it's not really what I want to talk about, but because it's been in the news for a month now, and everybody's getting stir crazy, and it's just this too much nonsense regarding that. It's nice to have something else to talk about, which is, I don't know if we've mentioned it on this show before, but I know you've probably heard of it, the accusations against Joe Biden from Tara Reade. Mm-hmm. And this week, something new came out about it, and it's kind of shifted my perspective, because when I first heard these allegations, again, a lot of people were making the claims, okay, she's a Bernie supporter, didn't like Joe Biden, making accusations that he physically assaulted her, not harassed her, actually used his hands to perform an action that would consist of rape or at the very least sexual assault. So this is a pretty major accusation against the Democratic nominee. That's the other thing, is all of his competition has dropped out. Joe Biden is it for the Democrats, which is okay. Don't know. Yeah, I was like, man, that's the best you could do. So they're pushing Joe Biden as the Democratic frontrunner. He is, even though I guess it's not official, as in because they still haven't had the Democratic National Convention, which is where he would get the official nod as yes, he is the candidate for the Democrats. Right now, he's the presumptive nominee.
That's if that happens. New York canceled their preliminary.
Yeah.
And just said, no, it's Joe.
Yeah, but I mean, at this point, they can just kind of do they at the time that they would normally announce, they'll just announce that it's Biden. I mean, I don't know if they need to actually physically meet up in a location or anything like that, but it's
I mean,
going.
you
Yeah,
would do to get all the total votes and tally everything.
yeah. So for all intents and purposes, Joe Biden is their nomination, and it seemed at first like this Tara Reid person was making claims against Joe in order to get, in order to have Joe or hurt his campaign, in order to get Bernie a little bump or something like that. But Bernie's out. Biden's the only person left. All the other ones have dropped out. There's nobody running against Biden. He's running unopposed. Similarly, Trump is also not technically the nominee right now. He's the presumptive nominee because he's running unopposed. It's still not official because the Republicans also haven't had their convention to nominate their presidential candidate. That's just kind of like technical formalities. But for all intents and purposes, Joe is the nominee and Trump is the nominee. And those two will be going against each other. But Tara Reid is still pushing these accusations against Joe Biden. Now, if you look at previous incidences of this, like so there's Kavanaugh, right? That's the people are making the comparisons between Kavanaugh and these Biden allegations, because when Blasey Ford came out, everybody was touting her as a hero. Oh, it's credible, it's believable. I believe her. This definitely happened. Well, her accusations against Kavanaugh would not amount to rape or sexual assault.
Nope.
So the accusations she made against Kavanaugh is that Kavanaugh and some other guy threw her on a bed, laid, basically towered over her, but then either passed out or laughed at, or rolled off and laughed and all that sort of thing. But nothing. It's like, if it was a true allegation, yes, something occurred, but what occurred would not account to rape. There was no penetration. There was no touching of the breast, butt, or genitals. There was no exposure of anything. So at the very, I could see a case being made for regular assault or something along those lines. Kind of something that's kind of serious, but not as serious as rape or sexual assault. But even by her claims, what she was claiming there, it's something you could take to court to prosecute criminally. Again, not probably 30 years later. I know in most instances, rape, there is no statute of limitations. This is, I think, at least in the states where she claimed this happened, there was no statute of limitations for rape. However, crimes like assault or harassment do have a statute of limitations, which her claims were far beyond. So at the point where she was making those claims, there's nothing that could have been done about them.
Yeah.
Now, in the case...
She was additionally never claimed it was rape by her own statement.
Yeah. So everything... Yeah, so it never crossed that line into rape. So at the very worst, it was assault or... or something along those lines. I don't know what the technical terms would have been at the time. But whatever the crime would have been, it was outside of the statute of limitations for that crime. Then you go to the accusations against Trump. So here's the other thing I want to highlight here. As soon as he was nominated and confirmed, all the accusations against him disappeared. Nobody is still pushing the narrative that, oh, he's a potential rapist or gang rapist, or he's a sexual assaulter, or he's abusing women. Nobody's making those claims anymore. Blasey Ford is the only one who has not retracted her statements, but she's not pushing it still. She's not going on interviews and claiming, she's not writing that anymore.
Yeah. Saying, look who we've got as a Supreme Court justice, that's not basically still following up because it's an event that's supposedly happened. It's vanished.
Yeah. So and her appearances and all that sort of stuff dropped off immediately after the confirmation.
Mm-hmm.
Like she was kind of everywhere, and then the only time people are talking about her now is in relation to this Joe Biden scandal. And if you also look at the accusations against Trump when he was running, same thing. As soon as he got the nomination, or as soon as he won the it's not nomination. What's the? It was prior to his inauguration, but after he won on November 8th, right? After he won the election, he was elected president. All the allegations against him disappeared. Either they were thrown out in court, or the people making the claims retracted them, or they just stopped pursuing it. Nobody, yeah. Meanwhile, Joe Biden is still being, these accusations from Tara Reade are still going against Joe Biden. It's like, well, if she was only making these accusations because she wanted Bernie instead of Biden, I mean, she is a staunch Democrat supporter, and that's the other thing that is different. In Trump's case, it was Democrats making accusations against Trump. And in Kavanaugh's case, Democrats making cases against Kavanaugh. Biden's case, Democrats making accusations against Biden, not Republicans. So, because she is a Bernie supporter, the other thing is her accusations are far more credible because she did work for Biden. She worked in the on the Hill under Biden. She worked in his office. I don't know if she was an intern or if she was that part's a little fuzzy for me because it's been a while since I looked into this. But she did work for him. They can't deny that they would have interacted with each other. With the Blasey Ford incident, she made those accusations, and she can't even prove that she knew Kavanaugh back then. Like, that she'd ever even met him back then. As far as her friends that should have backed up her story, they said, yeah, that never happened. They can't even back her up saying that she's ever even met the guy. Same thing with Trump. All the accusations against him, no one can confirm that this individual ever met Trump. And there was a newer accusations from that crazy lady who talked about Nordstrom. Yeah, the clip pulled from Law and Order SUV or SVU.
Yeah, I saw that comparison. I'm like, did she just quote in that show?
Yeah, so that crazy lady, she's also a Democrat, making an accusation against him. There's no proof that those two ever met. She has no proof that she has ever met Trump anywhere else.
Nope.
Or ever in her life. Whereas Tara Reade, she worked for the guy. And this is the part that didn't click for me until I started seeing and I'll play a clip here. Because this is the news that came out this week. And this kind of changed things for me. I was like, yeah, there's still... It seems very different from previous accusations, but this kind of cemented this as there's something a little more here than what I originally gave it credit for.
A clip from Larry King Live, the old 9 p.m. show on CNN, features a call from a woman Reade tells reporters is her mother. Watch this.
San Luis Obispo, California. Hello.
Yes, hello. I'm wondering what a staffer would do.
Oh, hang on a second. I'm watching the Tucker clip in case that... As I sent you the clip, this is the one where Tucker is watching the interview.
Besides go to the press in Washington, my daughter has just left there after working for a prominent senator and could not get through with her problems at all. And the only thing she could have done was go to the press, and she chose not to do it out of respect for him.
Or she had a story to tell, but out of respect for the person she worked for, she didn't tell it.
That's true.
Alright, so that's the thing that came out this week regarding Tara Reade. So, that is on Larry King Live. Now, Tara Reade in a recent interview told the interviewer that her mother had called into Larry King Live regarding the situation. Because she's gone on record saying that she, at the time, So this was 1993, not 30 years ago. Let's see, what's less than. All right, it's less than 30 years, but not by much, right? 93 is what, 27 years ago. So, so the accusations are from 1993, is when this incident she claims happened to her. And then so she said at the time she told friends and family and her mom. Maybe not all the same details, maybe not as in-depth as she's recently told, but they knew something had gone on between her and Joe Biden that had cost her the job. And it's apparently something pretty severe, something that she could have gone to the press with to damage his career with. This is a career-ending scandal. Now, if it's something along the lines of maybe political corruption, we don't know. I mean, because that's all we have as far as that Larry King Live clip was, she was trying to deal with this internally and wasn't allowed to, or wasn't able to and was left with the only option being to go to the press, and she opted not to out of respect for him. Now that's the part that doesn't sit well with me, because it looks like all these pieces are stacking up to confirm that, yeah, her claims are valid. This definitely seems like a sexual assault, or possibly even categorized as rape that occurred to her. But this, out of respect for him, that's the part that doesn't sit well with me. And I know that I can't get into the mind of a victim of something like this, and it could be that she admired this guy so much at the time that she's like, oh, this is she was kind of downplaying the severity of what occurred, and it's only in more recent times that she's come to grips with it. And maybe at the time she was like, oh, I don't want to be that person that drags him down over this little thing. And I'm like, if what she's claiming occurred, it's not some little thing. And
there's a couple ways to look at that. I mean, so we're not sure what she told her family.
Yeah.
But from the clip of where her mother called in, she didn't give any specific name.
Mm-hmm.
She just said a prominent politician recently let someone go because of, and gave kind of a description that matches hers, and it fits in with the right timeline, but they didn't give any specific names. So I don't know if it's because she didn't want her daughter's name out there as having been in the situation.
Yeah.
So,
she did mention it was her daughter, but never gave the name of her daughter and never gave specifics. So nobody listening to this could isolate and be like, aha, it's her. It was Tara Reid. This is Tara Reid's mom. So no one at the time could have narrowed that down.
Correct.
Yeah.
I mean, if you picture I could see where a younger woman would be afraid to have that type of information put out in the public, and so everybody she knows that she was sexually assaulted. That's sometimes the case of why people don't want to come forward and just say, I'm just going to ignore it and let it slide. So I don't know if that's the case here. Maybe it was because she respected him. She was part of his staff, and then got let go and just kind of vented to her mom, but didn't want to tear down, a senator. I don't know.
Yeah. Now, when it comes to accusations of sexual assault and rape, an anonymous report can be sent, but given the perpetrator of the incident, there's no way she would have remained anonymous. Her name would have been She could have submitted an anonymous report, and that would have been sealed internally within the investigating unit. But as soon as Joe Biden's name came out there, as far as his accuser, the media would have been all over it, or Joe Biden's internal would have been released the name. There's no way it could have been contained. Like, if this was something like a small like a corporation as opposed to the national stage, that's something somebody could submit anonymously, and the person could be investigated, and the victim would not have their name plastered all over newspapers and headlines. Had she come forward at the time, there's no way she would have stayed anonymous.
Yep.
So there is that to consider. So that might be a factor in here.
Yeah, but who knows that right now we can't.
Yeah, but so something
Yes.
so this triggered something for me. It's like, wait a minute, why isn't anybody talking about this? Because when Tim Pool was talking about this, or Ben Shapiro, or anybody else who's talked about this, they always mention, oh, she's a Bernie supporter, and okay, so her coming out against Biden is just, it might just be a political tactic. But my question became, why is she a Bernie supporter and not a Biden supporter? She worked for the guy. She worked for Biden. She knows Biden. She, like, if this had just been some kind of political falling out or whatever, oh, she was just dismissed for some kind of, administrative purposes or something. But she's like, okay, well, maybe I don't like Biden. Maybe we didn't work out. But she's, like, she liked the guy enough to work in his not campaign, but as part of his staff when he was a senator. She liked the guy enough back then. Why would she shift perspectives and be a Bernie supporter? And this is the part where I haven't seen anybody comment on, is like, well, if he's the guy that sexually assaulted her, and she'd be like, well, what are my choices in the next go-around? I still want to remain a Democrat, but I can't vote for that guy. That guy's a creepo. She went with Biden, who maybe she thought was the next best option, but it's like, if somebody...
I mean, Bernie.
Yeah,
you said Biden.
Oh, sorry, so Bernie. Yeah, going with Bernie because he's the next best option. Sorry, the B names are all Buttigieg, Bernie, Biden. Yeah. Anyway, that's the part that I haven't heard anybody talk about, is like, what would happen if you were working for somebody and you supported them politically? What would cause you to not support them later on? Because I know there are a lot of people who intern and things like it. So even Monica Lewinsky, like after that whole scandal with Bill Clinton, was still a supporter of the Clintons.
Well, because that wasn't really assault. That was just...
Yeah, it was a scandal, but yeah, she wasn't but she wasn't the victim, but she caused this huge falling out, but was still a Clinton supporter. And it's like, look at all the other people who have been, kicked out of administrations, and they're still loyal to those administrations or whatever. They're still loyal to that, like, I guess the big variant to that would be people who worked for Trump who got kicked out and are now anti-Trumpers. But typically amongst political parties and all that sort of thing, even people who got dismissed from administrations, they still support that administration. They still, so like Trump is kind of the rare exception to that. Like, everybody getting kicked out is like immediately anti-Trump and going on news and oh yeah, he said the N-word, and I've got videotape that never surfaced from that one lady. But usually people who worked for previous administrations and that get dismissed for various reasons or whatever, and don't end up coming back, they still are loyal to that. Like, so like George Bush's I think she was I can't remember if she was the press secretary or not. There was a Dave Rubin interview with her recently, and now she's on the Five with the Fox guys.
Oh, Perino or something.
Yeah, so she worked in the Bush administration and was replaced, but she's still, like, she's written books in support of Bush. Like, she no longer worked for the guy, but she's got nothing but high praise for him and his administration. And I'm like, that's typical. That's typical of people who have a falling out or whatever, or get dismissed from. They still, like, yeah, the guy I work with, I'm gung-ho for him, but for some reason, and Trump, I can understand why there's so much anti-Trump, because everybody who comes out with Trump, they get a book deal, and they get all over, CNN and all the mainstream media for a month or two, and then they disappear forever. But it's very rare for somebody to have worked with somebody in an administration to then come out and be outright opposed to it. Like, Trump is the the exception to this trend, because it seems like everybody who gets kicked out immediately starts talking trash about him to no avail.
I don't know. My guess would be that he's crass. He comes across as
oh yeah,
a crass guy. When it comes down to business, he's not going to hold his words back. He seems like that kind of guy. So maybe it's usually sour partings.
Yeah, oh yeah. So everybody who does get kicked out, yeah, they immediately have sour grapes and all that sort of thing, because they think they're doing a good job, or in most cases they were working for him and resenting him the entire time and working against him, which is why he kicked him out. And it's like, yeah, if you were working against me, I'm gonna kick you out, and then you continue to work against him. All right, so this is the. So she used to work for the Biden administration, but then when he's running for president, comes out in favor of his adversary. That's not normal. And to me, that indicates maybe there's something more here. And the more we're seeing develop from this, the more it is. It's not proof by any means, but this is more consistency on the part of her making the accusations. And if you look at similar accusations where the person has consistency, they've got support, they've told people at the time, those other people can corroborate the story that, yeah, this individual came forward, told me what happened, the Juanita Broaddriak, all of these accusations against Bill Clinton where they were like, yeah, this was sexual assault or rape. In the case of Juanita Broaddriak, definitely rape. She is consistent on her telling of the story, has told people at the time that could corroborate, yeah, she came to me, told me this was going on. All of these accusers of Clinton, of his sexual assaults, they have been consistent throughout. That's why they keep pushing this forward. Granted, they're not getting the whole media attention because, that for whatever reason, people don't care anymore. And Tara Reid is not seeing attention on mainstream media, but she is seeing interviews on alternative news and things like that. And you still will see Juanita Broaddriak come on some of these shows like that. Like during Trump's 2016 run. Wait, 2016? Yeah. Wow. Yeah, 2016 run. I don't know why I thought it was 2018, but yeah, 2016 run. She would show up on Crowder and Alex Jones and all these other kind of shows and was making the rounds, not on mainstream media again, but on alternative media. And so Tara Reid is kind of doing the same thing, and her story has been consistent. It appears that she did want to come forward with something in 93, but was afraid to, and now is coming out about this. Now, most of the time when people are making these accusations, the political timing, and unfortunately for Tara Reid, that counts against her, because of the timing of this seems to be politically motivated. And again, her current allegiances to Bernie lean like, oh, there might be some political motivation here. And so those things are counting against her if this actually did occur. But
yeah.
But based on what I've been thinking about recently, this seems more like at first I thought this was entirely political and they're just trying the same Kavanaugh tactics. But the more I'm seeing all these pieces kind of line up, I'm like, something happened. That seems more likely that something occurred.
Well, there's a couple of issues that don't make sense with this. So one is the lack of questioning of Joe Biden at all. He's already had multiple interviews since this initially kind of broke. Not a single question about it. Just somebody saying, so any truth to these accusations? And just so he can say, nope, never happened. That's all I would have to say. But the fact no one's even acknowledging that or bringing that up in the mainstream interviews with Biden seems odd.
Yeah. Though the other thing is, anytime the mainstream media did mention it, they immediately went to how this couldn't possibly be true. It wasn't.
Oh yeah, they conclusion without even.
Yeah. Like I forget which one. So there was. Yeah. I can't remember if it was like the New York Times or something like this. It was one of those publications where they mentioned this accusation against Biden, dismissed it, and then spent like half of the article talking about Trump. And, you know, basically saying, oh, all these accusations against Trump are correct, but, oh, you can't count them against Biden. The ones against Trump are true. The ones against Biden, nope, not even worth considering. And I'm like, there's a lot more credibility. I mean, maybe I shouldn't use that word because that's what was touted against Kavanaugh, but it's like there's not proof that something happened, but there is at least support for the claims being made by Tara Reade. Like, something could have happened. Like, for all the other witnesses against Trump and Kavanaugh, there was evidence to the contrary. Like, yeah, there's a whole bunch of stuff that doesn't add up, that actually contradicts the claims being made. But here we're seeing everything, either, it's not proving it, but any information that is coming out is supporting her claims.
Mm-hmm.
So there is no immediate dismissal of it, aside from Joe Biden saying that never happened. But her story has remained consistent, and she's got corroborating evidence, not proving anything, but evidence is like, yeah, so this was apparently something that happened in 93, and there's support that at the time she's claiming something happened in 93. Now, if you go back to most of these other accusers who are saying, oh, this happened 30 years ago or 30 plus years ago, and we're like, well, did you tell anybody? Does anybody else know? And everybody's like, I don't know what she's talking about. I never heard her say anything about anything. If this did happen, she didn't tell anybody. But here, Tara Reade is having other people saying, yeah, she mentioned something along this lines back in 93. That is, all of this is adding up to, like, hey, maybe something happened. And in my mind, it's far more likely something happened than didn't happen. But yeah, like you were saying, is if you were a reporter looking into this sort of thing, you'd be kind of like, there's something here. Maybe we'll end up uncovering something, and yeah, she's full of it, and maybe she'll recant and all that. But they're not even trying.
Find out if she's lying or find out if she's not. They're not even investigating.
And I think it was, which one? I forget, because they were mentioning this on a bunch of shows, but I can't remember if it was the New York Times or the Post or something along those lines. But the guy running it said they're not covering it because it's not in the news.
Oh. So aren't you the news? If you covered it in the news.
Yeah. Well, we're not covering that because it's not in the news. Wait, what? You guys are the news.
Yeah.
That's the most absurd response. Okay, so I do have one more clip. This is from Tim Pool when he first started talking about it.
Assaulted her. And she said afterwards she tried complaining. She ended up basically losing her job because of it. She was like demoted and then eventually ended up leaving because she was being mistreated. Then we get this woman who calls into CNN's Larry King Live saying, my daughter works for a very prominent senator. Now here's the thing. Ryan Grimm has corroborated that the phone call from the show, he says San Luis Obispo, and they've corroborated, boom, Tara Reade's mother lived in San Luis Obispo. Tara Reade says it's her mother. We got him. Corroborating evidence.
Yeah, so that was, again, a little bit talking about, so, it is confirmed that the lady calling in to Larry King was indeed her mom. So, and her mother has passed away since, but and for some reason, there was something else in that Tim Pool clip that I wanted to highlight here.
Being somewhat facetious, but let me show you this. This is where things get crazy.
Yeah.
Take a look over at the Google Play Store. You will see in front of you a bunch of episodes of Larry King Live. August 9th, 1993, August 10th, August 12th. Now, why would there be no August 11th episode? I honestly don't know. In fact, it says right now the show is unavailable.
Yeah. That's the part that is like, if there's nothing here, why? So the clip exists because Tucker Carlson got his hands on it and was playing that, but it's not available from CNN. The episode where that caller is calling in and talking about the situation is not available on CNN's official library of Larry King Live. It's available on the internet. CNN could pull it because it's their property, could pull it from some other source of it and add it to the library. Oh, this just got misplaced, or it was deleted, or we didn't have a good record of it. But it's available elsewhere. Why is that particular episode gone? And
well, the question would be, unless people are documenting, copying CNN's entire archive of Larry King Live, where are they getting these clips from? They must have gotten it recently when the story first broke, or when someone found out this clip existed. So they pulled it as soon as CNN found out, oops, there is something on this video. They dropped the video, because I've heard reports that the video was on there just a few weeks ago.
Yeah, so I haven't seen any proof that it was up there, but it seemed that to me, I'm like, yeah, my brain is screaming, yeah, this was up there until this scandal came out, and then they dropped it, and like, oh, what are you talking about? And the number of the episodes were renumbered because that episode is missing, but there's no missing digit in the episode list. It goes from, let me pull that.
Yeah, it was like 111, then jumps to 113 or something like that.
No, it doesn't actually skip at all. The date skips. Yeah, so it goes 154, 155. You're like, but 155 is actually that Wednesday, because he talks about it being a Wednesday episode, which doesn't quite make sense why it was missing, because usually Larry King doesn't miss it's a 5-day-a-week a show. So he said occasionally there's a Monday episode missing because it's like a 3-day weekend or something along those lines, but there's no other Wednesday episode missing. And it skips from the 10th to the 12th. That's not a weekend. It's a Wednesday. But the number goes 154, 155. And that 155 actual episode exists elsewhere. So they removed the episode from their catalog and renumbered the episodes. Now that's something easy you can do behind the scenes and programmatically. But Larry King Live, the episode number 155 occurred on August 11th, and other sources have that August 11th episode as episode 155.
Yeah.
Why is CNN trying to hide this particular episode? Because that's what it looks like. Because if the episode was just gone from their library, they wouldn't have renumbered all of these.
No.
Because episode 155 is episode 155. It's just, episode 155 is not available.
Yeah. Archive footage is broken or data got messed up. We can't post it. Who knows? That can happen. But they would keep the original episode number, just like any show or news broadcast or television, anything ever.
Because that throws off their whole the whole identification for each episode.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the bizarre part. Is like, you could think maybe there's not a whole lot to grasp at here, but when they're actively trying to cover it up, or what it looks like they're actively trying to cover up, it's like, okay, it's the Barbra Streisand effect, where you're like, okay, they tried to hide this. We know they're trying to hide it. That shines a spotlight on it. And I'm like, okay, maybe CNN either knows something more than what they're telling. Like,
so it's still circumstantial. Yes, this was in 93, and yes, there's a woman calling, and her mom lived there, but it could all be coincidental. Maybe it sounds like her mom, maybe it doesn't, and there's no way to verify that, really.
Well, I mean, so the fact that the search for this episode came about because Tara Reid mentioned her mom had called in Larry King Live, people wouldn't have known about that episode or wouldn't even tried to bother to find it. Except in an interview, she said, "Oh, my mom called into Larry King Live and mentioned this." Then people found the episode. Then people looked and was like, "Oh, her mom at the time was living in this place." So, and then Tara Reid confirmed after listening to the clip, it's like, "Yeah, that's my mom calling in." So
yeah,
there's enough to kind of
That is still, as of right now, in the information put out, I guess speculative, or it sounds reasonable, but still requires kind of proof or a tie-in to link that 100% as factual. Because it could also be someone found that clip and said, hey, there's somebody, this sounds similar, we can use that, inform Tara, and then she spoke about it during an interview. I don't think that sounds like some more covert ops just happening, but that's a possibility.
Yeah, that is a possibility.
And just left the video and let people come to their own conclusions and stayed out of it, it would seem less suspicious. But with this action, it now does seem there was a reason to cover that video up or try to hide it.
Which that's the bizarre thing, because even if CNN had left that clip up and people were accessing it and were looking into this, they'd be like, okay, that doesn't really, that's interesting, it's kind of supporting her statement, but that still doesn't solidify a case against Biden. But then when CNN is burying it, and when they're not talking about it, and you're like, are they hiding that episode just because they're like, oh, there's nothing to this, we don't want people to even consider investigating in this? Or is it because, so there's two possibilities that come to my mind. It's either they're trying to protect Biden, or they're trying to protect themselves for not investigating this. And you were sitting on this, you had the inside scoop. As soon as she mentioned this in an interview, you could have been like, oh, we've got this episode. Pulled it up and start playing it on there. But they didn't. So now maybe they're trying to save face for themselves. And we're like, oh, we didn't even have the episode, so there's no way we could have. Or they're covering for Biden. And for my money, I would bet on covering for Biden. That's the most likely.
Yeah. And how is that the one episode that's missing that everyone still has it? That just, if that's coincidental, that seems unlikely.
Yeah, it seems very unlikely, and especially since nobody mentioned a missing episode, or I don't know how many people are going back and rewatching Larry King Live, because I don't know if you saw Steven Crowder talking about this, but yeah, man, Larry King is so boring. I don't know how he got. I don't know how he was so famous.
But talked boring? I don't know.
No,
never watched.
No, because if you watch it, because Crowder was talking about okay, he'll listen to the caller, repeat what the caller says, and then as a question to the other panelists, and that's all he does. He doesn't actually add any input.
Oh.
Yeah. That's So this is what's going on. What do you think about that? It's like, why are you even in the room? You add nothing to the conversation, Larry King. But anyway, that's at least he was asking questions, whereas modern journalists don't even bother with that. They instead insert opinions and don't bother asking questions. And when they do have guests on, they don't want to hear their guests' opinions on things. I forget which. Yeah, there was. I think it was was it Anderson Cooper or was it Don Lemon? I think it might have been Don Lemon. No, it was. Oh man, but they had somebody on. Man, I'm trying to maybe you remember what I was talking, what I'm thinking of, and I can't remember the specifics. But they
in fun of Trump supporters.
No, they had somebody who was like a. I know it was a Republican who came out there and was trying to talk about the COVID situation, and as soon as he started responding, and the host didn't like his response, it's like, oh, I'm not asking about that, I'm not asking. And then the host went on, and I think it might have been Don Lemon, went on a 2-minute tangent on something, and it's like, and the other guy's just like, why am I even here? You asked me on here to ask me a question. You asked me the question. I gave my response. You didn't like my response, and you start talking over me and oh, I'm not here to ask about that. Then why even have me? It was man, I gotta look up that clip for later, but maybe not this evening, because that was very, very interesting. Okay, all right, sorry. Yeah, I don't know why I can't remember the exact situation and who was involved in that, but I know it was a Republican guest who came on one of these CNN shows, and the host just talked over him because they were given a response they didn't like. Sorry, my nose is running a little bit right now. I'm not sure why. Okay, but I think we've hammered the Larry King, Tara Reid story. Tara King, the Joe Erotic story. A little too much. So the next thing I want to talk about. Okay, so this is what I was talking about last week. I'd like to kind of emphasize something here. Bring it back a little more to philosophical terms, because I mentioned the Catch-22 was 2 weeks ago, or maybe 3 weeks ago now, and then I talked about the situation of being the Sophie's Choice was last week, or the Philosophy's Choice, and I think I was talking about it, but maybe I described it inefficiently, because afterwards I'm thinking about it the whole time, and I'm like, okay, I need to describe a difference here. So there's two philosophical terms, that kind of relate to both of those, the Catch-22 and the Philosophy's Choice. One is a false dichotomy, and I'm going to explain a false dichotomy. So a false dichotomy is where you're saying you have a choice of red or blue, and you're like, but there's more colors than just red or blue. Why are you limiting me to red or blue? I could also choose green or yellow or purple. That's a false dichotomy, because you're setting it up as if it's a choice of red or blue, and that's it. And you're like, but if you're talking about a color, why are you limiting it to red or blue? You have all this range of colors. There's, however many, wavelengths of visible light that manifests as colors. Why are you limiting it to two options? So limiting a larger choice to two choices is a false dichotomy. Now, that's not the situation I described last week and the week before. And I was just thinking, there's another term in philosophy, which is a false dilemma, and that is what I was referring to last week. False dilemma is where you are presented with a choice when a choice is not necessary. And I don't think I clarified it as a false dilemma. And the more I was thinking about it, it's like, oh, I've got to make that clarification between a false dichotomy and a false dilemma. So a false dilemma is more along the lines of, you can choose either to keep breathing or to drink water. And you're like, but if I choose to keep breathing, I can also choose to drink water. I mean, probably not at the same time, because then you're gonna drown yourself or choke. But you can continue to drink water and continue to breathe. Those two activities are necessary for life. You don't have to choose to either keep breathing or drink water, because if you choose not to drink water, you're going to dehydrate. You're going to basically die off, because you don't have enough water to keep your internal systems going. But if you choose not to breathe in order to drink water, then you're still going to die. And you're like, it's a false dilemma, because you don't have to choose between those, because you participate in both of those activities all the time without conflicting with each other. You continue to breathe like we're doing right now, and I'm occasionally taking sips of water. I don't have to make a choice. I'm like, oh, well, if I want to live by continuing to breathe, I have to stop drinking water from now on. No? That's not a choice. But so the false dilemma is saying you have to choose between these two when you don't. Now, what a actual dilemma would be, is this statement true or false? If it's not true, it must be false. If it's false, it cannot be true. If it's not false, it must be true. That is an actual dilemma. But when you have a false dilemma, it's like, well, you can either continue to breathe or drink water. It's like, well, if I continue to breathe, it doesn't necessitate that it isn't necessary that I cannot continue to drink water. Mm-hmm. So it's a false dilemma saying you have to choose between these two things, and I'm like, I don't have to choose between these two things. I can do both. I can continue to do both. So that's the false dilemma that I talked about And I wanted to make that distinction because a false dichotomy is very similar, and sometimes people get and for me, like I was getting the two somewhat confused because I kept saying, "Oh, it's not a false dichotomy, but what is this?" And it's a false dilemma. It's a choice where you don't have to choose between two options because you can do both. But in the case of a false dichotomy, you can't choose to do both. You can't. So it's a choice between. So they say, "Oh, it's a choice between red or blue," and you're like, "I could do both red and blue." Not necessarily when you're talking about a false dichotomy. Because in a false dichotomy, usually it's like say a multiple choice test, like A through E. If you choose A, you can't also choose E. You're given one choice from 5 options, but a false dichotomy would be to say, "Oh, but ignore options C through E. You only have options A and B. Just focus on A and B. Don't even bother with the rest." It's like, well, what if E is the correct answer? And you've limited it to A and B. No matter which one I choose, I'm going to get the wrong answer. That's a case of false dichotomy, because in a false dichotomy, one option precludes the other. Like, if you choose A, you can't also have B be true, and you can't have E be true. You can't have... the only one that you can have selected is A. You can't just highlight all of them. So, the false dichotomy is a limitation of choices where the choices are distinct, where if you choose one, the other one can't be true. Like, so a example of a false dichotomy that I'm going to try to... Hopefully this is a good example. I don't know. So, you have 2 suspects that are accused of murder. Right? Both of them... But one guy's DNA is not at the scene. The other guy's DNA is at the scene. But it's not the DNA inside the victim. Like, so say it was his DNA is at the scene, but his DNA is not on the victim. And a third set of DNA is on the victim. But you only have 2 suspects. It's like, well, this guy, his DNA is not at the scene at all. That guy is not the perpetrator. This guy, his DNA is at the scene. His DNA is not on the victim. That must be our guy. That would be an indication of a false dichotomy, because the presence of a third DNA would make somebody like, hey, there's probably a third party that we don't know about who was at the scene that committed the murder. Now, the person that, suspect B, whose DNA was at the scene, maybe they're an accomplice to the murder. Maybe they didn't participate in the murder, but they're a witness of it. Or they didn't stop the murder. But we can't prove that they are the murderer, because there might be a third person that we don't know about yet. And so there's a third suspect we need to be looking for. That's an example of a false dichotomy. It's like, yeah, there's 2 suspects, but if you go and arrest this one guy when there's a possible third suspect that you should be looking for, that would be a false dichotomy. So hopefully that's a good example. I don't know but did you see any flaws in the...
Well, I would say if you're trying to force more of you can't have both, that could be a little confusing. It wouldn't specify how many colors there could have been. I was thinking more of, you brought up red and blue.
Yeah.
Let's say a man and his wife are painting their bedroom.
Mm-hmm.
He says, okay, we want to paint this solid color. Do you want red or blue? False dilemma would be, or a false dichotomy would be, there are other colors. We don't just need red or blue.
Yeah.
But even if you tried to apply both, you get purple. You cannot do red and blue solid.
Yeah.
So just with those 2 options, you can only pick one or the other. You can't have both, but there are other options. So I think your murder story was pretty close. But I guess that was the only thing missing, is they identified it's a single killer.
Yeah, because it could be 2 people. Yeah, okay. So that's... It's
the same lines.
It's similar, but yours is more concrete. There are ways of viewing the analogy I came up with that would open up other questions. Yeah. Okay. Whereas the color thing is more distinct. Or okay. Yeah. And the false dichotomy is a fallacy, but there are situations where that is brought into question, the false dichotomy. So this is something I want to spend a couple minutes on, hopefully not too much longer because we're already at 8 o'clock. But so people, because I was talking about the existence. So I've had people comment. So I don't know if you've heard of rationality rules.
No.
YouTube channel Atheist makes a bunch of videos trying to dismiss God. Well, he did one video about the argument from improbability, and completely got the argument incorrect. I've been on that comment section I don't know how many times, and every once in a while somebody will reply. So the argument from improbability, he dismissed by bringing up the lottery, and it's like, yeah, the odds of winning the lottery are around 1 in 3 million, and yet every week somebody wins the lottery, or every whatever drawing somebody wins the lottery. It happens pretty regularly. And my rebuttal to that is, that's because there are a lot of people playing the lottery. The odds of an individual ticket, yeah, the odds of an individual ticket is still 1 in 3 million, but if you have 3 million people playing, the odds of somebody winning is 1 in 1. Having a winner, the odds of having a winner is 1 in 1 if there are 3 million people playing.
Oh, well, then that would be a perspective thing. The odds of you winning is still 1 in 3 million, but the odds of someone winning are 1 to 1. Yeah. Somebody's probably going to win it.
Yeah. So in order for the lottery to relate to that situation, you would have to, or to relate to the existence of the universe, if you're saying the odds of the existence of the universe is 1 in 3 million, and he's like, well, yeah, well, I mean, people win the lottery all the time, so the people, you know, the universe existing, same thing. And it's like, in order for that to be the case, there would have to be at least 3 million universes in existence. Now, the odds of the universe being in existence is not 1 in 3 million. There's something called Penrose's number. And it's described as a number, I don't remember the exact number, but it's like something like 1 to the power of several million, something like that. But the number is described, the best way I've heard it described is it's a number so large, if you numbered every atom in the universe, you would still not reach Penrose's number. Every atom in the universe, if you counted them, you could not count to Penrose's number. And the odds of our universe existing is 1 out of that number. So there would have to be more universes in existence than there are atoms in our individual universe. Now, the way Penrose came about this, or factored this number, is because of all of the empty space in the universe. And if you think that an atom could appear at any one of those spaces in our known universe versus where they are currently, or where they are in a range of where they are currently. Now, the range that he's talking about is related to entropy. Now, if all the atoms are evenly distributed, nothing can occur in that universe. And we know that the second law of thermodynamics is the universe as a whole tends towards entropy, where energy is evenly distributed. Now, in order for energy not to be evenly distributed, you'd have to have a cluster of atoms that needs to spread out. Now, the number of available spaces that atoms can be in the universe versus the number of atoms in the universe, like there are an infinitesimally small number of atoms versus the amount of space atoms could be.
Mm-hmm.
So that's where you get to Penrose's number, is because he's saying, okay, you've got all of these spaces where atoms can appear, and if they appear in the overwhelming majority of cases, if they appear in that order, we don't have life because there's not enough energy for life to occur. All the energy is too spread out in the universe for anything to occur. So in order for the universe to exist, atoms have to be concentrated in clusters. And so there's a range of spaces where the universe could exist, and there is a range that is magnitudes larger where atoms cannot exist for life to exist. That's basically the breakdown of how you get to Penrose's number. So when you're given those options, there is a dichotomy in either a small subset of possible universes exist and a small subset or a larger subset where our universe could not exist. That those two sections are a dichotomy. There's not an in-between, because if it falls into the larger category, we don't exist in an observable universe.
Mm-hmm.
Now, people in the comments section are saying, oh, why are you trying to break this down into only those two options? Like, based on the given criteria, what you are claiming would expand the smaller subset, the smaller subset of potential universes where life could exist, which is that one in more atoms than are in the universe number.
Okay.
That subset.
But that's just, it's either on or it's off.
Yes.
There either is life or there isn't.
Yeah.
You can't have both.
Yeah, so these people are trying to expand that smaller subset, and they're like, what you are describing is included in that smaller subset. You can't expand that smaller subset by saying, oh, but what about those universes? I'm like, those are included in the smaller subset. You can't say that I'm ignoring those in the smaller subset so we can expand that. But that's what people try to do. They say, oh, well, there's a third option that you're ignoring here. And I'm like, no, there's a small subset where life can exist, and a larger subset where life can exist. What's the third option?
If there's life anywhere in the universe, then that means it does exist in that universe, so it's not in the larger subset.
Yeah, it falls in that smaller subset. And these people keep saying, oh, there's a third option you're not considering. And I'm like, what's that third option?
A dimmer or something. You can flip the light on, flip it off, but I've got a dimmer. It's still on. It's just to what degree.
Yeah, but that's within that smaller subset, yeah. The dimming is within that, yeah. But these people act as if that dimmer is outside of that smaller subset. And the other thing is, I brought this up in the Blue Politics, similar discussion, where I said, okay, either the universe is randomized, there's no, or it has a purpose. Like it was created with or designed. So my way I express this, so either the universe was created, in which case there is order, or it was not created, in which case everything's random.
Mm-hmm.
And the person I was talking to is like, oh, there's a third option you're just ignoring, and I'm like, what is that third option? Never gave me a third option. Just said, oh, there's other things that could exist, and I'm like, no, I just described a binary. Either it is created with order, or it is randomized. And you might see order within the randomization, but you would see more randomization than order in that universe. So that was my argument. If everything was truly random, you would see more randomness than order. And yet we see a universe where there's more order than randomness. But
ultimately those are opposites.
Yes.
Order is the opposite of randomness, so they can't coexist. Yes. But what you're talking about is, due to the size of the universe, a certain degree of observable order could potentially be there, just like a random number generator. Eventually, if it run long enough, you may get a repeat number here and there. So it looks like, oh, we've got a repeat. Must be some kind of order. But that's just because it's random. It could happen.
Yeah. So, but the rebuttal to that was, well, there's a third option that you're ignoring. That third option never presented itself. And I was like, that's people trying to claim a false dichotomy, where it's like, no, this is a dichotomy. Either the universe is ordered or the universe is random. Now, if the universe is random, there may be some instances of order that you could point out. Just like if the universe is ordered, there would be some instances of randomness that you could point out. But it's the overall structure would be ordered versus random. There is no in between, because it's going to fall on one or the other.
Correct. But I think what you guys are focusing on is it's like you're talking numbers, but you're talking about two different numbering systems. You're talking binary, and you're like, there's either 1 or 0, and they're like, no, there's 2, 3, 4, because they're talking, you know, a decadecimal or something.
Yeah,
they're thinking of, you're still talking numbers, you're still acknowledging 1 and 0 exist, but they're thinking of a different set where you're saying, no, we're supposed to be talking about binary. And in binary, there is no 2. It's a 0 and 1 representing what could be 2, but there is only 0 and 1. So I think that's what people are getting lost, is they're not understanding the source, or it's like two people speaking English but talking two different things, and so while they can understand the words, they're not talking about the same thing.
Well, that's been more or less my experience with people on Blue Politics. Now, for the most part, majority of people I talk to, they're sensible, they talk about rational things, but there are people who overwhelmingly leftists. I've only talked to one guy who was supposedly right-wing, but he ended up going down this train as well, where the longer you talk to them, the more you realize they all believe the same thing, that nothing is true because everything relies on our senses. And I'm like, ugh. Okay.
Yeah,
you can't prove anything because it's relying on your senses. And I'm like, okay.
But that would be like, if I see a building in the distance and a blind man can't see it because that sense doesn't work, does that building not exist to him? Can he walk through it because he can't observe it like I can? It's still there.
Yeah.
Walking, he's going to run right into it.
So, yeah, it's...
Your senses don't pick it up, or what you're observing may not be the right thing to observe with whatever senses, doesn't make it not true.
Yeah. It's also a bizarre situation where you can't prove anything to anyone.
Would have wished Trump out of office 3 years ago.
Yeah.
Just because by ignoring him, he would have poof disappeared.
Yeah, it's the where they claim to believe in objective truths and objective reality, but then they'll also claim that there's no way you can prove objective truth or objective reality, and it's like, how do you have that? It's this very bizarre view of the world that is internally inconsistent, because if there is objective truth, then you can prove it. That's so, because so I let me I'll let you continue if you gotta.
Oh, I was gonna say, I think what's happening is they are, I guess, during modernism, where it's built off things from the past and it kind of expands into modern era. Now we're in postmodernism, where for some reason there's a concept, break it all down.
Yeah.
When you get elevated to too high, and it's not that we're at any sort of ceiling, it's that they're not sure where to go. There are too many possibilities, and now they feel the need to break everything down. I guess it's that postmodernist type of...
Yeah, it stems from postmodernism.
Disregard everything that has come before because it's too much, or I have too much, and so now I'm just going to decide what I accept. I'm wondering if it's just due to excess.
Possibly, but I think it's more to do with what these kids are being, or what some of these are not kids. Some of these are, around my age, 30s and 40s. But what they were taught in schools all revolve around this sort of notion. And a lot of these people who are supposedly really, really intelligent have been misled along these lines. And I've seen this. I don't know if you've been watching the recent discussions. Stefan Monalou, he's been had a couple of debates with socialists and stuff like that. And it almost like, so these are people who either believe in determinism, which I think we've talked about that, or they believe that you can't prove anything, because I saw Destiny arguing this as well. I'm not sure if you know who Destiny is, but so one of the people, they called me a young Ben Shapiro, and I'm like, I'm older than Ben Shapiro, but okay. And another guy, was it Darth? He recommended Darth Dolan versus Destiny. And Darth Dolan is arguing in favor of God and Christianity, and Destiny is arguing in favor of atheism and all that sort of stuff. But Destiny opened up his argument by saying we have these presuppositions that our senses are true and that our logical reasoning is sound. And I'm like, if those aren't true, you can't even have a discussion. You cannot. There's no point in continuing an argument.
That defeats civilization. It defeats communication. There's no point in any of it because none of that can be true, and we can't judge the logic behind who we're discussing with. Because what if your logic isn't working? Who knows?
Yeah, it creates this weird sense that if you can't rely on your own logic and reasoning as being sound, then you can't be sure that you're understanding their argument. You can't be sure that, like, so if, say, they prove something, you can't be sure, like, how do you know whether they proved it or not? How do you know, like, if you can't rely on your senses, how do you know that you're hearing what they're saying? Or that the words that they said are actually what they said instead of just what you're hearing? Like, I heard something different from what you said. Like, everything breaks down. You can't... This defeats all communication whatsoever because everything said is unreliable. Like, if somebody says the sky is blue, you're like, oh, did they just say the sky was blue, or did they say kill my dog? I don't know. It's equally likely. What? I heard them say the sky is blue, but they might have just made a death threat to the president. I don't know. I can't tell because I can't rely on my senses. What? Well, I also can't rely on my reasoning that they said the sky is blue because, well, I think they said the sky is blue, but if the sky is blue, then this thing that I also see is the same color as the sky would also be blue, but I can't rely on my logic and reasoning, so they said the sky is blue, and this thing also is the same color as the sky, but that may not be blue. What? Everything you do relies on your senses and your logic and reasoning. Everything. You can't prove that your logic and reasoning and your observational skills are true, but they must be. They are axiomatic. If they aren't true, nothing can happen. We can't have discussions. We can't have arguments. We can't have logic and reasoning. We can't have philosophy. All of this goes out the window if those things aren't true. So this is something. I don't remember if I was. Yeah.
I would say it's. There are various logical leaps one can make. Some may be valid, some may be invalid, but it still takes a bit of logic to get from point A to point anything. With no logic, you don't get from point A to anywhere.
Yeah.
Because there's nothing to jump to.
Yeah, and that's...
So, you can have arguments on whether your logic makes sense or whether my logic makes sense, or whether we're both observing the same thing at exactly the same way. But those can be discussed, hashed out, tested to find whether one logic is true and the other is not, or maybe it's a gray area and they're both acceptable as outcomes of what was just observed. Or it also comes down to perspective. There's a ton of things. You're both staring through a forest and one guy says, I don't see anything, and you're like, it's beautiful. Take 2 steps over and stop looking behind that tree. Now you see everything. Yeah. Neither was wrong. It was perspective.
Yeah, so that you can get to that perspective and all of that, but you can't get there if you can't rely on if hey, all of our senses are unreliable and all of our logic and reasoning is unreliable. Like, your logic is unreliable, my logic is it's like, well, how do you even determine that is a correct analysis because your logic is unreasonable and you're telling somebody else their logic is unreasonable? It's like, wait, if everybody's logic is unreasonable, how can you know that everyone's logic is unreasonable? It's a self-defeating worldview, and these people hold it, and it leads them to weird situations where they're saying, you can't prove or you can't know anything, and I'm like, and they're still trying to have arguments with me about stuff like, whether it is more probable the universe is ordered or whether it's more probable the universe is unordered, and I'm like, You can't even get to there if you think that your own reasoning is unreliable, and you think everyone's reasoning is unreliable, and you think everyone's observations are unreliable. You can't get to the argument we're having without having this as a solid foundation. And yet, all of them, they erode that solid foundation and then continue to operate as if that foundation is solid. And that's how they get to these crazy worldviews, like determinism, and the guy who worshipped Satan and God and didn't have a problem with that.
What?
Yeah, there's a whole bunch of people who believe weird things, but they justify it to themselves by saying they can't prove anything is true. And I've had like 20 odd discussions with people on that Blue Politics, and once we boiled it down to the fundamentals, it always comes out to that same kind of worldview that they can't know anything and they can't prove anything. And I'm just stupefied by that. Oh, so last thing I want to say about this kind of topic. So, because one guy mentioned something about absolute truth versus objective truth. And there is a distinction. I kind of want to touch on that really shortly here. So, absolute truth is everything that is true, whether you can observe it, whether we can prove it. It's true. But objective truth is what we can prove to be true, or what is true and maybe we can't prove it, but we can be proved eventually. So that is the difference. So absolute truth would be something along the lines of, how many cups of sugar does it take to get to the moon? Well, there is an objective, absolute, quantifiable number of cups of sugar it would take to get to the moon. We can theoretically calculate that number. We can't prove that number, as far as I know. And if we did, it'd be a waste of time. It's something that could be known and would be absolute, but it's not worth our time and energy, and it is very difficult to objectively prove. But something would be objectively true as like, let's see, my car is missing, I didn't drive it, somebody took it. That would be an objective truth. As far as my car is gone, something moved it other than me. That's an objective truth that you can figure out, that you can prove by pointing to the spot where your car used to be. And then eventually you can find who took your car or why it's missing. That's an objective truth. It's based on an absolute truth, but that's an area where objective truth and absolute truth line up. So absolute truth is everything that does exist and has existed and will exist and all that sort of thing. But objective truth is a smaller subset of that we can prove, that we can observe, that we can determine. Now there are some things like, so when I talk about objective truth as far as morality would be an instance of absolute truth that we can determine, making it objective. So, because I got into a discussion with some guy about this, and he brought up absolute truth and objective truth as if they were one and the same, and I'm like, I never got to continue that argument because somebody else derailed it, and I'm like, that objective truth must be a subset of absolute truth, because there are certain things about the universe that are true that we will never know. We won't even, like, what is the atmospheric concentration of helium on a planet we don't know exists? That's an absolute truth. It can't possibly be objective, because we have no way of, we can't even observe the planet, let alone calculate the density of an element in its atmosphere. It can't possibly be objective, because we will never know it. We have no way of ever finding it out.
Would this fall under the same aspect? Like an absolute truth would be the temperature just changed here. The objective truth would be, are you using Kelvin, Celsius? How do we measure it? I can say by objectively, it shifted 2 degrees Fahrenheit. But it's not the same Celsius, so you can use different measurements, but still tell it changed. Yes. Absolute truth would be, it did change.
Yeah.
it's the same regardless of how we measure it or how we put our increments. It changes the same,
so,
no matter how you look at it.
Yeah, so objective truth, so like you were just talking about, is bound by frameworks. So if you've got a framework of Fahrenheit, you're going to get a different objective answer than if your framework is Kelvin or if your framework is Celsius. You're going to get a different... The absolute would be... The absolute is kind of inconsequential to the standard used.
Correct, because we can convert between any, and it's still going to give you the same temperature change.
Yes. Like, there was a temperature change. We are choosing to measure it in this increment, which is why we get different for Celsius and Kelvin and all that. But the amount of temperature change was consistent. So that's why you can convert between Celsius and Kelvin and Fahrenheit. You can convert between them and you get different numbers, but they're all representations of the same amount of heating or cooling. Yeah. So that's so anything that is objective is necessarily a smaller subset of absolute truth. For something to be objectively true, it must be absolutely true, but for something to be absolutely true, it is not necessarily objective. The
Correct.
Other side of that is things that we have determined to be objectively true may not necessarily be absolutely true because they're based on our current limited perspectives and our limited information. Like, this is something, hey, this is objective, and you're like, something down the line, later on we get a new bit of information, we're like, oh, we were incorrect.
Wrong, or the scale
Yeah.
or the identification method was wrong.
So we could prove it to ourselves that this is as objective as possible, but one new bit of information throws that all out the window, and we're like, oh, now we know, we thought this was an objective truth, but we were inaccurate with our observations, we were inaccurate, and now we have to come up with a new theory or a new way to determine what is the actual objective truth. So, so there are instances where something is, for all intents and purposes, objectively true, but it may not be absolutely true. So that is a very small subset of objective truth as far as we know. Like, there's instances where we're close enough, where we don't need the absolute number or something like that. We're close enough to accurate that no bit of new information is going to throw us completely off. But there are other areas where it's like, well, we know this to be true, but we know that based on our current information. We know this to be objective. And again,
so I guess it wouldn't be pointing out that objectivity is fallible, but that would be like saying the heaviest animal on Earth is this species. But we still may find discoveries of larger sea creatures way down, which one we can't get to yet.
Yeah.
And eventually that objectively becomes the heaviest animal.
Yes.
We just haven't found out. But at least as far as we're aware, currently that is the standard, and that's what everybody knows.
Yeah. And the last thing I want to say on this is a lot of people will look at those objective instances where we were incorrect because of lack of information or something like this, or because we were inaccurate. They look at that and claim that everything is subjective, or that means this is subjective. And it's like, for something to be subjective as opposed to objective means there is no knowable answer. There is no correct solution. But objective truths, there is a correct objective truth. That's the distinction between subjective and objective. Now, that objective may not be accurate, or it may not be absolute. It may not meet the full criteria of absolutely correct. Because absolute correct would be like, hey, maybe you're off by a second on a timing of something, or off by a millisecond on the timing of something. But the absolute truth goes down to, what's below a like nanoseconds, or no, wait, what's the?
So like, that already. Like objective here, it's just after 7:30. Where you are, that's not true.
Yeah.
Because we're in time zones.
Yeah, but it's also, you said it's just beyond like 7:30, but it's actually it's actually 7:37 where you are. So the absolute truth would be 7:37, and then dot 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 000 blah 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 blah, all these numbers at the end of the absolute time.
Yeah, but I mean, even with the way we measure time right now, there's a central clock, and they're using some sort of like I don't remember the material they're using, and measuring the decay, and that's what actually
Yeah.
all the countries have agreed this is what we use as our determination of a second or a millisecond or something like that. But what that has shown is that eventually all of our standard clocks that are based off of are going to shift, and after hundreds of thousands of years, 12 a.m. is going to be in the middle of the daylight.
Yeah.
The timing will eventually get off with our current measurement system.
Yeah. So
objectively, right now, the whole world's on the same clock.
Yeah. But it's not completely absolute, but it's by no means subjective. I can't say that. So right now I'm showing my clock says 8:39, but for you that means it's 7:39. If it was subjective, that means I could look at my clock, it says 8:39, but for you it could be 9:27. Or it could be 12 a.m. It could any response for your time would be accurate if it was a subjective category, because that's the thing that I've gotten into so many conversations where they don't quite grasp this. They look at things and like, well, if you are looking for an objective truth, that means it's something that we can determine, but we may not determine it accurately. When you're looking at something that's subjective, you can't determine it because there is no correct solution. It is individual to everybody. And so many people apply this subjectivity to everything they encounter. So they act as if everything is subjective, and that goes back to I can't prove anything because it's all reliant on my senses and my reasoning skills, and and nobody can prove anything ever. That's making everything subjective, which it's all, and it leads to very flawed worldviews and very flawed arguments and belief systems. It is, and I keep tracking it down. It all comes back to that almost central belief that everything is subjective, or that we can't know anything, and that is a very destructive mentality. And so many people hold that as a core tenet, and yet they may practice objectivity in other areas, but anytime you try to combat their objective thing that is their objective claim that is untrue, and you try to combat that and you try to break it down, they will retreat back to this, oh, you can't prove anything. I'm like, then why were you trying to prove this objective fact to me if you can't prove? But yeah, that is
that destroys everything.
Yeah,
we have detected murder cases because objectively somebody murdered someone else.
Mm-hmm.
They find the criminal and they prove it, and they have or even just through a testimony, objectively that guy killed another guy.
Yeah,
it's not subjective. If it's subjective, then to some people that guy's dead, to other people he's still alive and walking around.
Yeah,
because we can't objectively prove that. But no, he's dead, and this guy did it. We need objectivity in order to function.
Yeah, but
we need objectivity to build things and create technology. That requires objectivity.
Yeah, and so many people will retreat to that everything is subjectivity, or everything is subjective. They will retreat to that, so that way they can keep their objective or claims about objective reality that don't make sense. They're using it as a when Stefan debated JF, he did this a lot, and he kept saying you're retreating into wormholes, because it would he's talking about Stefan was trying to okay, you can't have a square circle, and then JF is like, well, in taxicab geometry you can have square circles. That's not even close to a French accent. not even close to the way he talks, but and he's like, well, or he also said, well, in some other reality maybe you can have a square circle, and I'm like, we're talking about this reality and what we can prove here. Why are you going back? And that it's the same anytime you're like, okay, I'm trying to prove something to you, or and this is why what you're claiming can't possibly be correct. Then when they feel that, they retreat back to this core foundation of you can't prove anything to me because everything is subjective. And so this is not a a thing that people discover on their own. This is a taught what's the, like, a safety net? I don't know what the idea that everything is subjective is something that is taught in the schools. It is not something that is that is inherently or instinctive, or it's not something you would come up with on your own. It's not something that feels natural. It's not something that you. It's a taught behavior as opposed to a learned behavior, or maybe learned behavior is probably taught.
No, not necessarily. Like if you look at humans, we start as infants and can't do anything for ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
The act of learning to walk is your body, your brain as an infant starting to learn how you function, how your feet relate to your weight, disposition, or weight distribution, and your brain picks up on that and builds its own logical bridges to enable you to walk.
Yeah.
If your brain cannot do that and it's subjective every time, your brain doesn't observe the same patterns every time you take a step, could not walk. You couldn't build that correlation. This is how we naturally grow as a species.
Mm-hmm.
Our brains build these logical connections our entire lives. It's built in us to look at things objectively. That's the only way we can function. Even animals have some basic knowledge of objectivity. They observe the same thing, and so now they know how to raise their young. They know where to get food because that water's there every time I go to that lake. That's an objective observation.
Yeah.
Has to be there.
And so the only reason people would keep retreating to this worldview that deconstructs everything is that it's taught by someone. And there's a whole lot of philosophers that talk about this sort of thing. So, not going to get into that in here. I think we've covered what I wanted to talk about, and a little bit more, because I just want to talk about false dilemma and false dichotomy and the difference between the two. And then I got sidetracked and talking about all these other things that have been kind of frustrating me over the past couple of weeks, because it's like, man, every time I get into this heated discussion about reality and about philosophy, it always boils down to everybody retreating to this, oh, you can't prove anything. So I was like, man, that is such a terrible thing to do, but it's not something they would do unless somebody taught them that is a practical, like, oh, this is a valid way of viewing the world. I'm like, no, it's not, but you wouldn't have come up with that on your own, because it's something taught in colleges and high schools, and that is extremely depressing. And
I don't know. I'm thinking it starts before then. So
probably, yeah.
When we were, competition was competition.
Mm-hmm.
You're taught winners and losers. It's an objective statement. Growing up, they got rid of that type of understanding, and now it's participation. There's weird rules where if one team is a certain number of points way above, they stop keeping score just so the other team doesn't feel bad. It breeds this idea that you're never wrong. You never lose. You always have something to gain, which is not really true. You can be wrong. People are always often wrong on something until they've learned the right way to do it, or the right way to measure it, or the right way to, discuss the topic, or the right definitions. But I'm wondering if it's that it's pampering of society to where there is no longer winners and losers. There is no longer this is success, and anything below that I would consider failure. Now it's, I have no reason to set goals. Where I am, I'm good enough here. I'm told I'm good enough here. So they don't become wrong if there is nothing to prove that they are wrong on. So it's kind of like taking no stance, having no winners. I'm wondering if has been indoctrinated just into society, and then further compounded by the education system as they progress.
That's a good point. Because I was just, as you were talking, I'm thinking, oh, there's also social promotion in classes. Like, if you, rather than being held back for 2 or 3 years, they just go to the next grade, because you don't want to be held back, even though you didn't meet the criteria for graduating. We can't hold you back, because that's
like when the curves. The teacher says, "Well, half of these students are about to fail this quiz, so I'm going to shift the grading curve down, and then in that way the majority of them pass just to keep it fair. That gets rid of an objective correct answer on that test. It just shifts things so nobody feels bad.
Yeah, so that, I mean, it's pretty pervasive throughout all of our early lives. Wow.
Mm-hmm. And I think we were just enough to kind of be at the start of it where everything was still kind of, your grades are your grades and that's what you get. And if you don't pass, you repeat the grade.
Oh.
You win or you lose. We had that growing up.
Yeah. And that's the other thing of like the Common Core stuff you were talking about, or I think we've talked about.
Oh, yeah.
Where
horrible.
It doesn't matter if you get the wrong answer as long as you did the right work to try to get there. I was like, or as long as you followed these steps that they told you to follow that make absolutely no sense and make things way more complicated. It's like, well, you tried even though you got the wrong answer. And it's like, if you got the wrong answer, you got the wrong answer. That's what it should be.
Yeah, well, they're even grading it on, you have to show in 3 different steps how you got here. And so that's 4 potential grades. Get the first question. Yeah, you got the basic logic. You got this logic. You came up with the wrong answer, but you got 3 out of 4 right.
Yeah.
And none of that's right. You've got the wrong answer. So something's wrong.
All right. Well, it is just about 9 o'clock. So I've got one last clip to end on. This was kind of I was not expecting this, but so I don't. You probably never heard of Cringe Panda. I hadn't until recently, but she's been getting a little bit of popularity. So this is pretty interesting here.
Gonna get canceled. She's like Soph. Her name is Cringe Panda. You should check her out. Okay, I have checked her out. She's exactly like Soph, and she's really cool. I checked out her videos. They're really, really good. Soph, if you're watching, you should be shitting your pants.
Surprise! To you, Cringe Panda. Do not stop speaking out and trying to be that voice for young children when you know something's going wrong in this country and you see what they're trying to do to young children and exploit them sexually. You know it's wrong. They hate to see a young person like you speaking out against the things that they want to target you with and brainwash you with.
Hey Cringe Panda, Lauren Chen here. I just want to say thank you. Thank you so much for what you do with your videos and for not being afraid to speak your mind. We are living in times where you can be punished pretty viciously for having a different opinion than everyone else, especially if you're a younger person, and almost all of the peers in your age group just don't accept that it's okay to push back against the progressive narrative, and I love that you don't let that stop you. So keep doing what you're doing. We need more people like you. Stay awesome, stay positive. I love you, and I'll see you in the next video.
What?
Okay, I'm gonna pause it right there. So I was recently made aware of Cringe Panda, and it's not because of Lauren Chin or some of these other people who were talking about her. And it's not even because Mark Dice. I'm scrolling down here. So Mark Dice is the pinned comment on her channel. But he's the main reason her channel has kind of exploded. So when I first found out about her, she had like maybe 20-ish K subscribers. And then Mark Dice talked about her in one of his videos. And her, like, she jumped up to this, nearly 80,000 now. But I found out about her because, let's see, I'm jumping forward to about the 5-minute mark, 5:08.
For that. Stay awesome, stay positive. I love you all, and I'll see you in the next video.
What is this?
I'll come up with something on my own. I'm sorry. I love you.
Maybe. Perhaps. Who knows?
Yeah, so it's because of her she was doing a collab video with Barbara, and then, I don't know if you saw that she ends with the same kind of catchphrase, or that's what Barbara closes all her videos, with, is a stay positive, I love you all, bye, and then she makes some kind of noise or whatever. So Cringe Panda was kind of copying that on several videos, and so she finally got called out on that by Barbara. But so it's because of her collaboration with Barbara that I found out about her, and then I'm seeing all these other people jump on it, and so the collaboration thing is something she's still editing or putting together, and it has clips from Soph and Barbara in it, And I don't know when that's going to drop, but the reason all these people were coming out in defense of her, like Gavin McInnes and stuff, is her channel got shut down because, like, most of the time it's silly kind of nonsense videos with goofy voices and stuff, but most of her videos are related to transgenders and drag queens around children. And she's got several videos talking on this, and I don't know how old she is. Like,
Yeah,
I'm
that's
guessing.
the thing. Why is that even a thing? Why is it important to be around children?
I don't know, but she's got some.
Children is other children and parents.
Mm-hmm.
That's it.
Yeah.
Why strangers hanging around your kids?
Yeah. Yeah, it's definitely an agenda to indoctrinate children, and she's spot on with that, and she's got a whole lot more videos and articles and things. She does a lot of very good research on this despite being young and talking about this issue a lot more than other people. And her channel got suspended for I think 2 weeks because of it was flagged as hate speech or something like that. But so she's got a lot of videos on this, and because of that temporary ban or temporary suspension, a lot of people are coming out in support of her because the videos she has made on these subjects, like, wow, this is really in depth, and it's not just repeating. Because, like, there's, I guess, to some extent, some of the videos I do is repeating what other people are saying. You know, is talking about news articles and stuff like this that other people are. But she's brought up a whole bunch of information that's not making its rounds on the typical channels, because this is something that she's very passionate about. And it's like, yeah, she's doing the research. She's putting out the content on these topics that has been kind of, I mean, I know people like Mark Dice and people like Lauren Chin have made videos about this, and there's a whole bunch of videos being made about the drag queen story hours and, you know, transgenderism around children and stuff like that. But that's like almost the primary focus of Cringe Panda's channel, or at least it has been for a while. And she's pulling up a lot more information than what normally comes up on this topic. So I'm happy she's got her channel back, but she said she's moved all of her content to BitChute and has a BitChute channel and all that sort of thing. So it definitely seems that she's on the right path because they blocked her, and because they tried to take her channel down. And I'm just wondering, like, what am I doing so wrong that nobody's targeted me? It's probably because I only have 100-something subscribers, so I don't. Nobody's. Yeah.
We'll see eventually.
Yeah. Well, the other thing is hopefully this will, like, she's got 80-something subscribers, and this particular video got like almost 50,000 views on it. But this is hopefully, I'm thinking, because now we've got a whole bunch of these other personalities like Gavin McInnes and Mark Dice talking about her, that maybe more people will look at Barbara and start seeing her videos, because while she's not, I wouldn't say, like, not an outspoken conservative like, say, Lauren Chin or Gavin or Mark, does have a rational perspective on a lot of the same topics and does make videos talking about these issues of, you know, transgender children and things like that. So I'm hoping that boosts her channel, but we'll see. It seems like she's been kind of frustrated, maybe, or a little depressed about her current channel growth, and I'm thinking, hopefully, because people are looking at Cringe Panda, they'll also look into Barbara and grow that channel. All right, that's just my perspective, and that's all I had prepared for today. Although, man, I can't believe I dragged that out for 2 hours. I'm such a windbag.
Discussion.
Yeah, and so hopefully there was enough. It wasn't me repeating a whole bunch of topics or, you know, repeating things that I've said before, and hopefully it was mostly relevant and mostly good. But I will call it a night, and unless you had anything to add.
Nope.
All right. So thanks for joining, anybody who does end up watching this, and I will see you next Tuesday.